Are you self-employed? Do you know if you're self-employed? Do you know what determines whether or not you're self-employed? Well, I'm Robin and I'm with Kell Processing, and I'm here to teach you about things that's going to make you have a smoother transaction. Whether you're a buyer, a loan officer, or a real estate agent, this information is good for you to know. So let's get into it. If I was to ask you, do you know what the difference is from a person that's an employee of a company and somebody that's self-employed? What would you say? You may say something along the lines of, if somebody works for somebody else, they're an employee, and if they work for themselves, they're self-employed. Okay, that's not bad, but not quite what I'm looking for. You may say, well, if they have taxes taken out of their paychecks, well, then they're an employee, and if they don't, then they're self-employed. That's a little bit closer. Put the two together, you might end up with a fairly decent answer. Lastly, you may say, well, if somebody owns part or all of a company, that they're self-employed. And that too is a pretty good answer, but all those things together kind of culminate into all the little ifs, ands, or buts of determining if somebody's self-employed. And the lender is going to take all of those things into consideration. So the more you know about how you work and how your income is based, you'll have a better idea of how much of that income is going to be able to be used for your mortgage qualifying. So I'm no CPA, but I have been processing mortgage loans for 20 years. So I'm going to break down to you not how the IRS looks at you as self-employed, a lot of similarities, but I'm not going to get into the CPA side of that. But I am going to talk to you about the way the mortgage company is going to look at your tax returns, your W-2s, your 1099s, your K-1s to determine whether or not they're going to put you into a self-employed guideline or an employee guideline. So I'd like to go back to the answers we were discussing earlier and kind of break them down a little bit more. So the first one, if somebody is working for somebody else, then they're an employee, and if they're working for themselves, they're self-employed. Well, the reason why this doesn't completely hold up water in all circumstances is you could be working for a company and you're just working for that one company. You go to that same job every day, but then they don't take taxes out of your paycheck and they give you at the end of the year a 1099. Well, to you, you think you're an employee of that company, and you are in the way that they call it a 1099 employee. You're not working for yourself. You're not out trying to find business for yourself. You're not marketing for yourself. You're going to that one place. But they didn't take taxes out of your paycheck, so therefore they do not consider you an actual employee of the company. They consider you a contract worker or a 1099 worker, which means whenever you file your tax return at the end of the year, you're going to be filing that 1099 income on a Schedule C. Now, you may file your tax return yourself, or you may have a service do it, or you may just enter the information online and let the online system give you the answer at the end of what you owe or any refund that you get without really putting much consideration into what that tax return actually means. But if you get 1099 for your income during the year and you file it on a Schedule C for your personal tax return, you are self-employed. Even without a business name, even without a company name that you're marketing for yourself, a DBA, or anything of the like, you are self-employed in the eyes of the lender. Now, the second answer was if taxes are being taken out of your paycheck, you're an employee, and if they're not, you're self-employed. Well, going back to the previous answer we were just going over, in that case, a 1099 employee does not get taxes taken out, and they get a 1099 at the end of the year, and they are considered self-employed on the Schedule C of their personal tax return. But it doesn't work if you are, say, the owner or part owner of a company, but you own that company as possibly a S Corp or corporation or limited partnership, and then you work as an employee of that company, paying yourself a W-2, that taxes are taken out. So in that case, taxes are being taken out of your paycheck every pay period, but you are still considered self-employed because of the amount of ownership that you have in the company. And then that takes us into the last answer. If you own part or all of a company, you're considered self-employed. Even that doesn't really hold up water because you could own stock in a company. So that means you technically own part of the company, even if it's a little teeny tiny amount. But that doesn't mean that you own the company. It just means that you own stock in the company. And that little bit of stock that you own does not make you self-employed. Also, according to the mortgage companies, if you own less than 25% of any company, even if you get income from out of that company out of a K-1, They do not consider you in the truly self-employed category. Now, again, this is where the IRS differs. I'm not going to get into how the CPAs do your tax returns, but you will get a K-1 if you have ownership in a company such as that, and that K-1 will have your percentage of ownership on it. If you own 10%, 15%, 2.9%, or 24.9%, you are not considered self-employed in the eyes of the lender. But if you own 25% or more, you are considered self-employed, which gets us into a different category of documentation so that we can show the income of that company and not just you as a partial owner of that company. Next, that takes us into a nice little transition into documenting the self-employed income that you're going to have with a company. Now, if you're a W-2 employee, all you should have is a W-2 from that employer or previous employers if you've always been W-2. And that is all that you're going to have outside of your current paycheck stubs, which we typically need 30 days worth. But if you're self-employed, the documentation gets a little bit more extensive. Now, if you are a Schedule C employee and say you have a company under a DBA where you actually market for yourself, work for several different people, or rather with several different people, since you're not working for anybody but yourself, then that Schedule C will show that. But if you're a 1099 contract employee working for one company and you have to file on that Schedule C, then that is too where the employer is going to look for your income. Now, this Schedule C will have places that you can make some deductions, and then in the end it will show your net income, and that is what you will be taxed off for your tax obligation. If you own less than 25% of a company, the lender will just take your personal tax return and the K-1 that was issued to you from that company. That K-1 should be reported on your personal tax return, and they will use that to factor out your income. Now, if you own more than 25% of a company, the lender will also want the company's tax returns. Now, all of these tax returns that I'm discussing are typically 2 years. There are some cases that the automated system will only require 1 year, but it's always best to prepare for 2 because not everybody gets that 1 year kind of category in their conditions request. So if you prepare for 2, you're going to be better prepared for the income that is going to be used to qualify you, because you may have a better year 1 year and then a less year the next year, or vice versa. But if you have 2 years, they're going to average so that they don't hit you with just the harder year of those 2 years tax returns. However, if your findings come back with just 1 year, then it's a little bit easier to factor the income, and hopefully that most recent year is the one that you made the most money to be able to qualify you on the house that you're looking for. So getting back over to the tax returns, if you have a company more than 25%, you will have to show those company tax returns along with your personal tax returns. There's a third option here. You could be a W-2 employee for one company and still have a business on the side that you either file as a Schedule C or that you own ownership of with a K-1, and that you might have to have those business tax returns provided as well. There's nothing that says that you can't have more than one form of income. So if you're a W-2 employee that also has a side business or ownership in another business, you will provide both the personal and the business tax returns if you own 25% or more in that business. Now, what the lender is going to do is you will get full credit for your W-2 income. Now, it gets a little complicated there too, because if that W-2 income factors in overtime, bonuses, or commissions, those will be averaged, but your base salary you will get credit for. However, if you have a business on your personal tax returns that has a loss, let's say hypothetically speaking, I'm just going to throw out some numbers here. Let's say you're a W-2 employee, salary, no overtime, no bonuses, nothing funky going on. You made $50,000 last year, but you made a side business last year that you had losses of, let's say, $20,000. You started a company, or you started doing something online, or heaven forbid you're one of those people that just wants to have a Schedule C to write off anything possible because then you think it's to your benefit because it costs you less in taxes. Well, I'm not going to get into tax fraud or anything and whether or not certain things are right or wrong, but let's say it's all legitimate. In that case, $50,000 for your W-2 income minus $20,000 of self-employment loss means you only have $30,000 to qualify for a mortgage. This has really caught some people whenever it comes to documenting these things because they're not expecting it. And oftentimes they don't even tell their loan officer that they have a side business because they think it's irrelevant, it's just for fun, or it's just for whatever. It doesn't matter that I had some losses, it's fine. and they don't tell their loan officer, and their loan officer doesn't ask for their tax returns, which, as far as I'm concerned, loan officers should always ask for borrowers' tax returns unless they're 100% positive that that person has nothing other than the W-2 income that they have documented. Meaning, you've got to know that person pretty well to know that they don't have anything on the side. So you've got to look at those tax returns so that you don't have a shock when all of a sudden you've been hit for $20,000 worth of losses and your borrower can no longer qualify. This also goes for business tax returns. If the person owns 25% or more and has to provide those business tax returns, that business better not have a loss. Typically doesn't happen this way because usually those type of things are owned by more than one person. So they usually don't show losses on the business tax returns just to pay out the people. But I have seen that a few times where the K-1 will show money going to, say, a 50% partner. You make the assumption that the other 50% partner also got the same amount of income, but then they show a business loss. Well, that doesn't make for good business if you're paying the owners out more profit than the company actually has in the end after paying out for expenses and other employees and such. So those business losses will count against you for qualifying as well. So these are just some things to really, really think about whenever you're self-employed, determining whether or not you're self-employed and how it's going to factor your income. I have seen many files get blown up because loan officers did not ask the right questions, borrowers were not forthcoming with their sources of income, and then it came out after the contract was already executed, appraisals were ordered, sellers working on moving trucks, and buyers out buying new furniture for their new home. That is not whenever you want to tell somebody that they cannot qualify. Now, there is a last little bit of self-employment income, which is not really self-employment income per se, but I want to put it out there just because it is another source of income that also needs to be reviewed on the tax return and gets factored totally different on the income, and that is Schedule C for rental income. Yes, it's not actually a job, it's more of a passive income. You own it, you're getting rent, you have expenses, you write it off, you pay your income tax on that income. This is why this is important. If you have a rental income that you've had for, say, 3 years, the lender is going to be looking for that property to be on your Schedule E. If it is not, there is a problem. You cannot take in rental income through a lease and then not report it on your tax return, but think you can still use that rental income on your qualifying ratios. That's not going to work. But let's say you bought a house just last year. Let's say this is actually September now, and last October you bought a rental property. So you haven't had it but just under a year, and you did not have it rented out last year because you were doing renovations. You didn't rent it out till January 1st. So your lease started January 1st. So last year you don't show any income. The lender's going to be okay with that. You can even have some losses for last year because you were renovating and you wrote that off for that property, getting it ready for rental. That's okay too. Or you might have bought a property in February of this year, rented it out immediately, or maybe did some renovations, and now it has only been rented for about 6 months. So that's okay too. The lender may have restrictions based on the program that you have to have previous landlord experience if it is not on your previous tax return, because there's no history of you being able to maintain rental properties. They're kind of exhausting sometimes, and you've got vacancy rates, getting people in and out. If you have somebody that's not paying and you have to evict, that's additional expenses in addition to maintaining both properties, the one you own and the rental property. So that's going to be factored in. So the lender may want something to show that you've had previous landlord experience to be able to use that income, but they're not going to be expecting to see it on last year's tax return. So I wanted to point that out since it is a different type of self-employment income. You're self-employed in that you own the house and it is an income source, but it's not something that's going to show up on a Schedule C. And also those rental incomes too, sometimes people will put those rental properties in LLCs to give them some protection there in case anything happens. Their assets for their personal is protected, and so that may be a case too, that it might be a rental property that was just purchased this year under an LLC that your borrower owns. So there's no tax return for that LLC yet, but there is a lease to be able to count the income from that property. But again, the lender may want previous landlord experience to be able to use that. So that's it. I know that was a lot of information to cover in a very short period of time. I really tried not to draw that out too much, but this is a topic that loan officers, especially new loan officers, oftentimes get wrong. that they, like I said, they run into problems after the file's been approved. Oftentimes realtors don't even understand how income is factored and whether or not somebody is self-employed. Oh, and I wanted to throw out one other thing. If you are self-employed, whether it's LLC, whether it's K1, whether it's 1099 on a Schedule C, you do have to have at least 2 years worth of history doing self-employed income. You may not have to provide 2 years tax returns if the findings only call for one, but you had to have been in business for 2 years. The reason why, two reasons. They say that, and I don't have any stats to quote, but this is like a normal thing. You know, most businesses fail within 2 years. Sometimes people say 5, sometimes people say 2, but it's true. A lot of businesses get started and they fail. It's too much work. It's too much money going out of their pocket. They can't maintain it. So that business does not keep going. However, there's another side to that that the lender looks at. If you've never been self-employed before, or you haven't been self-employed recently, then you may not understand the obligations of paying your own taxes and keeping up with your receipts and such for your tax return. There's been many people that have gotten into a situation where they've started a business only to find out at the end of the year that they owe the IRS a large sum of money because they were not making their estimated quarterly payments as you should as a self-employed person. You do not want to go down that rabbit hole. It is not a nice place to be. Do not get on the bad side of the IRS. But if you do, even if you get into a payment plan, that payment plan debt is now going to be calculated into your debt to income ratios for qualifying, and you typically have to have the payment agreement to the IRS with the IRS fully agreed upon, and usually have to make 3 payments to the IRS before a lender will close you. That's if you get into the payment agreement. If you don't get into the payment agreement in time to be able to qualify for the mortgage and have that payment history, then they're not going to close you because they don't want to close you on a house that the IRS is instantly going to be able to attach a tax lien to that property. Doesn't mean that they're going to instantly, but they have the right to. And that is something that the lender is not going to tolerate because an IRS lien takes precedence usually over the first lien. The IRS is always going to get their money. So I wanted to make sure that I put that out there. So hopefully you like this video. I've been kind of taking a break, trying to get some other things done in my personal life and had some travel going on. So I'm going to try to start doing some more and get some more out there so that I can get hopefully my first 50 videos out there. Again, I don't know if this is going to go anywhere, but hopefully the people that are watching it, which all of my loan officers better be. Guys, girls, you've got to watch these things. I shouldn't have to ask you if you saw it. Anyways, but hopefully this is something that's going to help everybody have smoother transactions. So again, this is Robin with Kell Processing, and thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.